Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a world that's more dangerous and hairier than your average trip to the barbershop. The absurdly chaotic world of medieval barbers and their surprisingly nefarious practices. Forget about haircuts and shaves for a second. We're talking leeches, bloodletting, and the kind of bedside manner that would have you fleeing in horror faster than you could say, "Is it too late to switch to a barber surgeon?" So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment about where you're tuning in from, because I love seeing how far the buzzing of medieval shenanigans has travelled. Now, dim those lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft ambient hum, and get ready to settle in. But first, have you ever wondered what would happen if you entrusted your life to a guy who just might have had a little too much wine during your procedure? Was a haircut really the least of your worries? Did medieval folks actually think leeches were the ticket to good health? Or did they just enjoy a good squirm? How many trips to the local barber surgeon ended in comical disaster, and possibly missing limbs? And what was the tipping point where you decided just a trim was more than a little too ambitious? Well, congratulations. You've just woken up in the year 1353, and you're in a bustling town square filled with the sounds of laughter, pain, and the distinct smell of questionable ointments. Good luck. It begins with the simple premise of a haircut. But what if that haircut also came with a side of surgery? You see, barbers in medieval Europe weren't just slinging shears. They held the keys to a secret world of pain management, bloodletting, and surgical expertise that would make modern barber college look like child's play. Imagine stepping into a dimly lit shop, the air thick with the scent of damp wool and questionable fragrances, a delightful combination of old sweat, cheap ale, and maybe a hint of burnt offering to appease the barber gods. So there you are, ready for a trim, but instead you catch sight of a rusty saw sitting next to a pair of clippers originally designed for sheep, not humans. Do you backtrack? Of course not. You're in medieval Europe, and you've probably already made a series of poor choices up to this point, including dinner last night, which may or may not have involved an entire goat. The barber nods at you, and you half wonder if he remembers you from last week when he tried to sell you on the efficacy of bloodletting for good health. Good health, you think, biting back laughter and horror at the same time. Spoiler alert, strange liquids are on the menu, and that's not just whatever is in the bowl labelled "no touching." As the plaid cloak flutters and the blade glints ominously, you remember that barbers treated everything from minor injuries to more serious conditions that today would be medicated by the very people who still think shoving a vial of leeches on your skin is a good idea. Seriously, who needs an expensive doctor when you've got a barber surgeon ready to treat your ailments for half the price of a good bottle of wine? But, on the upside, they did wield a special charm literally. With prayers, incantations, and the occasional rabbit's foot, they formed a band of medieval miracle workers. You sit down in that creaky wooden chair, and just as the bustle of the market fades, you can't help but wonder, did medieval barbers moonlight as comedians? The thought crosses your mind as you're caught between anxiety and curiosity, wishing for a hair tonic that wouldn't kill you after one sip. You could throw caution to the wind and strike up small talk, and then find out you're one of the lucky few who gets to reminisce about sights of grievous bodily harm over the years. But barbers did more than just create comedic silence. They lived at the intersection of aesthetics and agony, continuously balancing flair with emergency measures. Picture a nearby shop filled with men and women showcasing trendy coiffures, all while boasting of absurdly complicated ailments, none of which would likely pass muster with a modern medical professional. Ah yes, this is my third leeching this week. I find it helps with both complexion and existential dread. In an age when antibiotics were merely the plot twist of a forbidden romance novel, Surgical skills varied wildly and were often assembled around anecdotes rather than training. If you wanted to play Russian roulette with your health, then barber surgeons were your go-to crew. "Of course I can pull that tooth," the barber would exclaim, clenching a rusted extraction tool between his fingers. "No anaesthesia, but let's make it a little contest, shall we? First person to faint owes me a pint." And if that wasn't enough to scare everyone away, barbers also had the thrilling job of performing minor surgeries in public view. Yes, you read that right. Imagine cheering crowds in a town square while you're strapped down, or tacitly hanging onto the barber's shoulder for dear life, as the barber, grinning ear to ear, mangles a patient's foot, uttering some silly rhyme to distract the onlookers. What's the fuss? It's just a little snip, a tiny cut here. Now who's got the whiskey? So here lies the truth beneath all the rudimentary surgery and wild antics. Barbers provided a vital service to a society that had little understanding of health or hygiene. Armed with little more than a pair of scissors and a sense of humour, they transformed the mundane ritual of grooming into a life and death spectacle. Step by step, haircut by surgical procedure, they wielded the power to determine how you looked before you met your maker. In the end, you leave the chair half a head lighter and roughly 20% more anxious about potential illnesses. As you exit the barber's lair, you can't help but feel grateful for the modern wonders of anaesthesia, pharmaceuticals, and the peace of mind that comes with letting someone else handle all those nasty little health concerns. But let's not forget those charming tales of yesteryear, where life was just as much about the journey as the destination. Welcome to the life lived on the edge between folly and grooming, the barbaric art of the medieval barber. Imagine a world where your barber is armed with tools that look more suitable for a medieval torture chamber than a salon. From rusty razors to terrifying saws, let's take a moment to marvel at the sheer horror of their toolkits, each designed for that delightful combination of hair trimming and unforeseen surgical emergencies. It's like a DIY horror movie set, except instead of an Oscar-winning plot twist, you'd end up with a bad haircut and a lingering sense of dread. First, let's talk about the most essential weapon in the barber surgeon arsenal, the razor. Now, this isn't your neighbourhood barber's shiny Gillette. No. This is a crudely forged piece of metal that looks more like a medieval weapon than anything intended for mere grooming. You might want to consider taking out an insurance policy before sitting in that rickety chair. Slicing through hair and skin alike, this tool was about as ancient as your great-grandmother's teeth, and likely just as sharp, if not sharper. Speaking of sharp objects, you can't forget about the giant bone saw. Yes, bone saws. You might think that this particular tool was reserved for lumberjacks or ill-fated lumber mills, but think again. When a peasant strolled into the barber's shop complaining of a troubling limb, it was drama central. Imagine sitting there, hoping for a simple haircut, while the barber greets you with a surprised smile. It's literally the beginning of a new horror franchise. For the lucky ones, the barber might just offer a nice clean shave, but for those unfortunate souls lying at the mercy of medieval medicine, the only thing waiting was a very probable amputation. And if you thought the saws were an alarming touch, brace yourself for the sheer delight of the bleeding bowl. It's both an exquisite conversation starter and a grim reminder of just how far we've come in medical practices. Barber surgeons believed in the magic of bloodletting, that mystical cure for all that ails you. So while your hair is getting trimmed, don't mind the blood pooling in that bowl beside you. It's just a therapeutic sign that everything is going according to plan. One of the more dubious additions to the barber's kit was the leeches. Oh yes, those little suckers were King's best friends when it came to ridding you of your ailments. And why not employ them? They required absolutely no training, unless you count the one occasion where a barber surgeon accidentally ate one. There you sit in the chair, contemplating whether or not you're ready to pull a leech from the depths of your scalp, while they merrily guzzled away at your own personal reservoir of health. Who knew a simple survival tactic could turn into some form of weird medieval spa treatment? If your barber's feeling especially adventurous, they might whip out what resembles a cheese grater, only for poorly shaped wounds instead of cheese. This tool, known as a cautery, was used to sear flesh and draw out infection, effectively turning your scalp into ground zero for impromptu barbecue sessions on the worst day of your life. On a good day, this would ensure a boiling pain you wouldn't soon forget. On a bad day, it's the beginning of that old saying, out of the frying pan and into the fire. Now imagine you've survived the barbaric amusement park known as the barber shop. You left with a very unique and completely asymmetrical haircut. You can almost feel the prying eyes of neighbours and family members as they try not to laugh. The barber pats you on the back like he's just sent you off to war, ensuring you have no idea of the treatment you just endured. But incredible as the craft was, the world of barber surgeons still clung on desperately, forever teetering on the brink of absurdity and terror. They mixed craft with courage, wielded blades like wizards casting spells, and transformed hair management into something resembling a street brawl. Saws rattling, razors gleaming, and leeches slithering, barber surgeons embodied the very essence of medieval multitasking, ensuring every appointment remained an unforgettable journey. So next time you get a trim, count your blessings that your barber doesn't carry a cleaver or perform minor surgeries just outside your line of sight. You've got it made compared to the brave souls who sat in that wooden chair centuries ago, hoping for a semblance of style over survival. Ah, bloodletting, the spa treatment of the 14th century. Feeling a bit under the weather? Well, don't worry, it's just a bit of blood that's causing all your woes. Picture yourself in the barber's chair with a leech clinging to your arm while he tells you it's a totally normal procedure. You might be wondering why a barber is mixing surgical skills with your haircut, but in medieval times, the line between haircuts and healthcare was as blurry as the pitched roof of your hovel. Don't even think about sneezing. That could mean a leech or worse, a mini operation depending on how the barber is feeling that day. Imagine as you recline in that creaky chair, surrounded by the sweet smell of sweat and recently used bandages, knowing the barber, sporting a twirly moustache and an air of expert confidence, is about to prescribe a remedy straight out of medieval magic. You're greeted with gleeful enthusiasm as he waves a bowl of leeches like they're VIPs invading your bloodstream. These little guys have the power to suck out all your evils, he declares, eyes glinting with the promise of unnecessary drama. Just hold still as they do their thing, you might think. After all, what's a little loss of blood when the good people of the 14th century firmly believed that letting your lifeblood will restore your humours, those charming bodily fluids believed to be the key to all your health problems? Ah yes, those four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile and black bile. Too much of one? Better let the nearest barber surgeon go to work with his rusty blades. In the world where everything's a little too medieval and a bit too messy, your blood's out of whack. So, off come the blood and, hopefully, your ailments along with it. And as your lifeblood trickles away into a bowl, you can't help but wonder if your barber is merely practicing on you for a morbidly unique carnival act, or if he genuinely believes this will make you feel better. It's surely just a minor inconvenience, you reassured yourself, trying to downplay the realization that you're losing so much blood that you could open a fast food drive-thru for vampires. But fret not. Bloodletting's supposed fans would argue this method is a miracle worker. If you leave with a headache, they'd claim, it's a sign the procedure was successful. The pain came out of your body like excess humours failing to keep you supported. And just look at the snazzy bandages. Those reminders of your brush with the barber surgeon are all the rage. They turn heads at market day, allowing you to mingle with the other brave souls who've laid themselves on that most fashionable of tables, the butcher's block. And let's not forget the delightful tales that arose around bloodletting itself. Imagine it being treated less like a serious medical practice and more like a bizarre social event, where you've gathered around your local barber's shop swaying with elation at the thought of losing enough blood for a prophetic vision. I heard old Tom got so much bloodlet that he slipped into a fever dream about his wife's goat. Reverberates through the cobblestones, sending everyone into a fit of laughter, which only serves to rattle the barber as he performs your needed treatment. But oh dear, what fun would bloodletting be without the threat of poor hygiene? Your barber isn't so much a clean chemist as he is a mad scientist without the glamour. Blood-soaked instruments, a common theme. With every slice and release, folks found themselves contemplating a secondary cure, an existential crisis while imagining whether they should have included a warning label on their arm as the barber readied a blade. Bloodletting may result in fever, infection, and a sudden realization that you're no longer invited to social gatherings because everyone fears you'll bleed out at the dinner table. And deeply, deeply unsettling as it is, many did have miraculous success stories. People walked away from the experience charmed by their newfound lightness. "I'm practically floating," they'd declare, spinning off their local barber's chair like a freshly trimmed feather. Little did they realise that lightheadedness wasn't just from the spirits of the local ale. It was the blood that had very suddenly dipped down into joyfully irretrievable levels. In the end, bloodletting was a fascinating charade of medieval medicine, equal parts terrifying, hilarious, and downright bizarre. It exemplifies just how desperate and whimsical our ancestors could be in their pursuit of health, even if it demanded letting loose some of that precious humour. Frankly, the barbers were just having their fun, and you, well, you were the reluctant star of this gory comedy. So the next time you fret about making a medical appointment, just know it could always be worse, like being asked to choose a favoured leech from the menu. Welcome to medieval operating rooms, or rather the barbershop under the open sky, where the sun illuminates your unfortunate predicament. No curtains, no sterile environments, and definitely no anaesthetics. Just a whole lot of spectators, and perhaps an unfortunate goat that wandered too close to the action. You're about to get the kind of life-saving surgery that would make a modern-day doctor faint, and let me tell you, it's not the fainting goats you have to worry about here. Imagine the scene. You're lying on a rickety wooden table, balancing precariously between a swarm of curious townsfolk and the barber surgeon, whose last meal appears to be hanging on by a thread. The sweet smell of wildflowers fills the air, but it's quickly overshadowed by the more pungent stench of sweat, unwashed bodies, and either something burning or a poorly booby-trapped hairpiece. This isn't the environment for the faint of heart or those with a weak stomach. In fact, you'd best leave your dinner thoughts at the door, because the barbers probably didn't have the foresight to set up a no-vomit zone policy. Who needs a medical school when you have an audience? As you take your position among the farmers, townsfolk, and a couple of disinterested chickens, the barber surgeon readies his tools, if you can call them that. You see, this isn't your standard toolkit. Oh no. This is a collection of medieval mayhem featuring rusty blades, roadside pliers that have seen better days, and an assortment of leeches that may or may not have been borrowed from the local swamp. All the while, the barber downplays your anxiety by mumbling into his apron. Just a little snip here and there, maybe a bit of leeching, nothing to worry about. Good luck figuring out what little means in his world. Ever felt the glorious touch of the sun's rays? It shines a little too brightly as it glints off the glistening sweat of your would-be healer. You could practically serve a dinner plate on the state of those tools. Just to give you a visual, a crack in the sky may reveal a few plump clouds, Not that the barber is looking up. His focus is locked onto your rather exposed body part, whatever it is they're about to go at. Is it your toe? An unsuspecting pimple under the chin? This is a game of surgical roulette where you're betting your life, and the only prize is remaining conscious long enough to see how it all turns out. The crowd now fully invested. They lean in to catch every moment of anticipation. One poor soul at the back shouts advice, "Cut deeper," you hear. Meanwhile, you're wrestling mentally with the urge to yell back, "No, let's aim for over here and out of my bloodstream." There's a certain charm to community involvement, right? Nothing like surgery as a spectator sport where everyone's a critic and no one has any medical training. Perhaps it's in the midst of this tension that you learn a valuable lesson about trust, the kind of trust that makes you wonder why you didn't just stick to herbal remedies. Your barber surgeon decides to make his name doing what any self-respecting hairdresser does. He takes a snip and leaves you all too aware of your burgeoning vulnerability. The moment of truth arrives as he plunges in for the first incision to relieve the pressure on your ailment, or whatever jargon he might throw around. But let's be real, it's more do-it-yourself than Harvard postgraduate surgery. If you're hoping for the comforting grasp of anesthesia to cushion the blow, then you're in the wrong century, my friend. Instead, your mind is racing. Your heart pounds as the barber hums an off-key tune, perhaps in an effort to distract himself, or maybe you. Is this your first time? You wonder quietly as he shifts his grip on whatever ancient and embarrassing tool he's about to use. The barber's forehead beads with sweat resembling tiny jewels, both due to the warmth of the day and the seriousness of exertion under so many critical eyes. With one final, "Here goes nothing," he's on Judgment Day. The heat rises, not just from the sun, but from the chorus of oohs and ahs as the barber does what he can, skill or lack thereof flying out the window. After all, a little showmanship never hurt anyone, right? Finally, after what feels like an eternity, he steps back, hands raised in victory, showcasing not only the bloody trophy, but the metaphorical blood that any modern-day medical intern would die to avoid. "All done," he proudly proclaims. "Did you live to tell the tale? Well, you might want to reconsider whether it's worth bragging at the tavern later. Because if you survived surgery under the medieval sun, you've just earned a lifetime of stories, punctuated by a rather gnarly scar and a sudden aversion to roaming goats. Welcome to medieval healthcare, my friend. It's a world where every operation is a high-stakes gamble, and your barber may just be more legendary than any knight in shining armour. What happens when the barber is just a little too tipsy from last night's lager? Shoddy cuts aside, let's explore the greasy pitfalls of a medieval barber, whose morning hangover is only matched by his total lack of a steady hand, leaving you to ponder if looking like a drunken sheepdog is really worth the risk. Picture this. You're nestled snugly into the barber's chair, a rickety contraption that's seen better days, probably during the last pandemic. The aroma of stale ale dances through the air, mingling with the scent of sweat and animal hair, a delightful blend that fills your nostrils with no small hint of dread. As you look into the mirror, you can't help but question your life choices. Why did you think a shave was a good idea? Now let's take a moment to appreciate the serious artistry behind this calculated chaos. When you considered barber, you probably envisioned an expert trim, maybe a dapper style fit for royalty. Instead, you're witnessing a scene straight out of a slapstick comedy. The barber, let's call him Gregor, is swaying ominously with a pair of trembling shears in one hand and a half-empty mug of questionable brew in the other. He squints at your reflection like he's trying to decipher hieroglyphics, while his other hand fights a brave battle against the morning sun streaming through the open window. As the blades hover precariously close to your ear, you're suddenly struck with the realization that Gregor may or may not have finished that last round of ale, and who could blame him? In a time when the only remedy for a rough day was more ale, you can imagine the barbershop quickly transforming into a local tavern by noon. Just one more pint won't hurt, was the rallying cry. But let's be real, the last time anyone saw Gregor sober, he was likely wearing less facial hair and had slightly fewer holes in his tunic. The audacity of letting a half-cut, hungover barber near anything sharp was midway between folly and a medieval rite of passage, much like jumping into the village's muddy pond. Perhaps despite your better judgment, this would feel empowering. After all, if it doesn't take your head off, why fret, you muse, trying to sweat it out with a combination of bravado and risky choices? Of course, Gregor's shoddy craft isn't all about immediate appearance. You'd love to think he's merely testing the limits of his social license, but spare a thought for hygiene. With daily visits to the butcher serving as great icebreakers, any remnants of raw meat likely made their merry way onto the shears, and in turn your freshly cropped scalp as he lops off curls, now intertwined with beet juice and grain mash. The ongoing saga of medieval grooming doesn't just stop at hair. Oh no, my friend. There's also the matter of skin, or rather how much of your skin is likely to be exposed to the wrath of a careless snip. And let's not forget the unyielding crowd watching from the sidelines, mostly bystanders with little to do except cheer on the mayhem. As laughter fills the room, Gregor clears his throat and suddenly decides that going for a more artistic cut will impress the locals. Cue lineups of patrons eager for similar unique styles, having just witnessed the adventurous mishaps of the last poor soul in the chair. Each haircut becomes a communal experience. It's not simply about getting your hair styled, it's a session of anticipation, bordering on the theatrical. Patrons also have an unspoken understanding that, while results may vary, we can at least reckon with the fact that you're merely participating in the craft of hilarity that no modern hairstyle will ever rival. And hey, if Gregor messes up your look too badly, you might just find yourself on a quest for revenge. It truly is the essence of medieval barbers, an uncertain cocktail of pleasure mixed with dread, where every haircut is a gamble, but offers rich rewards in laughter, spectacle and conversation. So next time you think your haircut was a disaster, remember Gregor and the trail of tipsy barbers before him. What you've survived is part of a legacy. A shared humour that spans centuries, quietly tucked in the folklore of the misplaced locks and too cheerful patrons. Join in the laughter, relish the camaraderie, and raise an ale to a barber armed with nothing more than a shaky grip and questionable hydration levels. After all, life is too short to take even the wildest haircuts too seriously. Picture the familiar barber's pole twirling outside of shops, the red, white and blue. Historically, it represents blood and bandages. Did you know that the colours signify medical services, or rather, the barber's excellent skill at juggling bloodletting and bad styling? The red represents the blood that flowed freely during a good bloodletting, while the white symbolises the bandages used to stop that flow. As for the blue, well, let's just say that historically it was often associated with the veins of patients who didn't exactly survive their barber's techniques. Talk about a colourful history. In medieval times, a barber wasn't just someone who trimmed your beard or cut your hair. No, they were your multifaceted, all-in-one handyman. One moment they'd work diligently on crafting a fashionable coif. The next, they'd be prying leeches off you and cautiously wielding a rusty razor for a deeper, far more alarming procedure. So picture this. You stroll down the street, admiring that fantastic new hairdo, when suddenly you catch sight of a barber's pole twirling in the wind. Before you know it, you're calculating the odds of slipping into the humble establishment for a trim versus coming out as a freshly blooded patient. Now, let's just pause here. Ever wondered how it made sense to trust your life to a dude sharp enough to whack your beard? but dull enough to think leeches are a reasonable cure for all your ailments. It turns out the barber surgeon was believed to possess mystical healing powers. Why? Because they had access to various cures and all the proper equipment. Armed with deep, if not quite accurate, knowledge of medicine, they played the dual role of a stylist and a soul reaper, perfectly adept at giving you that snazzy haircut, while simultaneously allowing you to bleed freely. If you were within an earshot of a barber during their work hours, you might hear more than the occasional snip of scissors. Combine the sounds of hair being removed with the screams of unfortunate patients enduring the surprises of the barber's latest technique. The first time you heard the absolute terror in your neighbour's yelp while attempting to woo the barber to do a little bloodletting through the arm wasn't just a beauty treatment. It was a ticket to become part of the local folklore. Seriously, we're talking about the medieval version of spa days gone extraordinarily awry. Speaking of that hilarious blend of madness, you might want to think twice about what you wished for when you went in for that haircut. Ever found yourself dodging questions about medieval barbering like trying to escape a bad first date? You could almost guarantee you'd end up hearing tales of a courageous lad who went in for a trim and ended up needing a whole new set of life decisions because, well, there's nothing quite like losing your leg to a barber's ambition. The other leg's freshly styled to perfection, of course. The barber's life was no easy stroll down the cobblestone path. The pressure was outrageous. Sure, they offered an impressive one-stop shop that included barbering, bloodletting and odd surgical tricks, but they were also dance partners in a fine line between life and death. How often did these brave souls juggle their absurdly risky practices amidst the strenuous demands of customers who expected not just for their hair to get cut, but their lives to stay intact? The stress must have been nuts. Now, fast forward to the barber's actual credentials. They didn't exactly come with professional degrees. Their apprenticeship usually included a healthy dose of superstition, a few sermons of dubious origins, and a dash of self-taught insanity to keep them on their toes, or more accurately on the floor of whatever hut they operated from. Imagine how comforting it must have felt to sit in that creaky chair and have your hair snipped by someone who might as well have held a sign saying, "No returns allowed on surgeries." What could possibly go wrong in a world where haircuts doubled as medical procedures and everything between life and style was a game of chance? So next time you wander past one of those barber poles, take a moment to look closer and realise it represents a visual history that screams beware. Behind those cheerful spirals lies an entire world of medieval improvised mayhem where the margin for error was razor thin, and where the real story, a comedic mishap filled with a sense of blood and pomade, still swirls through the echoes of time. Because let's be real, it's not just a haircut, it's a tale as old as time, punctuated by daring barbers and a little too much confidence in their flailing hands. Welcome to medieval hygiene, or the absolute lack thereof. Forget your fancy soaps and sanitizers. Your barber was more likely to be a walking petri dish of "what's that smell?" as he slathered on whatever bizarre mix he could find, leaving your haircut to the mercy of questionable hygiene practices. Imagine settling into a chair that's less upscale salon and more wooden torture device. You're treated to the wafting aroma of old sweat mixed with an impossible medley of herbal remedies that your barber swears by. Spoiler alert. Most of them involved ingredients you definitely can't pronounce and would hardly want near your skin, let alone your hair. Now, let's get real about what constituted clean back in the day. You had far better luck finding a dedicated mud pit to roll in than you would spotting a bottle of shampoo. Barbers often used a concoction of pigeon droppings and herbs. Yes, you heard that right, as a wash. Because nothing says luxury haircut like a side of fecal matter. These quack remedies were meant to revive and nourish your hair. but heaven help you if you were mildly allergic to whatever fungi flourished in the barber's toolkit. You might have ended up looking like a patchy woolly mammoth instead of the trendy nobleman you aspired to be. So, as you pretended to appreciate the barber's artistry, did you ever stop to wonder what lurked underneath that floor? Spoiler: a horror movie's worth of filth, hair clippings, and who knows what else. The floor was less cheerful spa retreat and more open-air compost heap. Picture the scene. Patrons walk in with great expectations, only to be greeted by the squish of someone else's dread. Believe me, you'll think twice before letting that barber tell you to put your feet up. Speaking of which, you wouldn't have any additional protection from those errant clippings. More than likely, your barber was just as hairy as the rest of the peasants wandering about. There's a reason peasant hygiene didn't make it to the medieval paperbacks. Imagine your barber arm deep in a greasy mullet while also sporting a matted beard just below his chin, nodding sagely about the medicinal qualities of mould. Folks tended to accept that a few stray hairs might be mixed into their hairstyles, alongside an enriching powder of dried louse and passive updates on how everyone in town had been feeling fairly under the weather. Fresh towels. You were fortunate if the same cloth that previously wiped down a cow's udder was merely being used to dab a slick of sweat off your forehead. This may be an exaggeration, but it's only slightly far from the medieval reality. And it didn't stop there. Ever wonder why barbers had to be particularly proficient at extracting teeth? Well, consider this. If your barber was your go-to for all things hair and hygiene, they were often your dentist too. Buckle in and prepare for the kind of information that'll leave you trembling in your pillow fort. Dental hygiene was as advanced as one might expect it in the medieval period, meaning if you were lucky enough to keep a tooth until adulthood, you were overdue for celebration. A night at the barber shop often translated into a night at the torture chamber. Tooth extractions were done with the same tools used to cut hair. Didn't realise you were signing up for a 2-for-1 deal, did you? A cut and a yank soon turned into a cut and a yikes, leaving you to question if you'd just signed away a tooth for the whole day's misadventures. But fret not, brave patrons. The barber's charm and laughter made all things all right. He was charming, he had stories, and he could make you feel like you were indulging in something utterly sophisticated, despite the fact that you merely finished mixing dried pig's bladder with minced herbs to bake a cure-all for 4 days running. The medieval barber's chair was a stage, and every cut was an act of dramatic flair. So as you settled in, you couldn't help but momentarily forget the surroundings, if only to escape the reality of leaving your fate in a man's hands, whose fingernails bore the imprint of last week's lunch. And as the final touches were applied, you couldn't help but wonder what exceptional tales would be woven in the next barbershop consultation. The next man up might bring whispers of questing knights, battlefields, and perhaps a sideshow of sorts looking for duck feathers, a curious import for some equally curious hairstyles. So remember, folks, the next time you go to your local salon you might want to lift that first layer. Chances are it's a far cry from the medieval barbershop experience, a rather grimy page in history that illustrates just how far we've come in our pursuit of cleanliness and charm. Bravo, modern hygiene, it's truly heroic. Ever heard the phrase 2 bits? Well, medieval barbers operated on a barter system, and sometimes that meant you were paying for a back alley liposuction instead of a clean trim. Imagine reeling from the confusion of what you thought was going to be quick and painless. You know, until it wasn't. Your appointment would start innocently enough. You'd walk into the town square, where the barber's pole spiralled in colours that signified more than just hair sighting. They were the very essence of what lay ahead. A friendly smile and a slightly greasy apron would greet you. The whole experience was multi-layered, just like your tunic. Haircuts were as casual as hair-raising surgeries back in these medieval times. So you plop down in the rickety chair, and the barber spins his tools like a magician performing a magic trick gone wrong. What you don't realise is that shave and a haircut might just be a euphemism for sprucing up your looks before you meet your maker. First, it's the clippers, rusty of course, clipping away your locks while the barber regales you with tales of misadventures that made your heart race. You're wondering if you should laugh or scream as he explains how the tincture of leeches is the latest word in health. The barber begins by trimming your bangs, but this isn't just about aesthetics. That little bit off the top is also meant to eliminate the parasites that have taken up residence in your scalp. Fleas, lice, and any manner of critters are nonchalantly buzzed into oblivion while you lie back, praying your head doesn't become a life-size petri dish before you can say 2 bits. Then comes the soap, or rather, what medieval barbers thought of as soap. Imagine slathering your face in a concoction made from animal fats and ashes. It's like a skincare regimen that's one bad Yelp review away from being classified as a body horror show. As you clear your throat, you hesitate, wondering if this bitter-smelling brew is a grooming technique or the start of a bizarre torture chamber. After a few moments of distraction, you're inevitably ambushed by the sharp edge of the straight razor, a tool that would make even the bravest souls tremble. As the barber hovers above with that gleaming blade, one cannot help but ponder the question: when did getting a close shave escalate to potentially setting the record for closest call? Here's a fun fact. The term barber surgeon didn't just refer to their dual roles, but also to the knives they wielded, a category that included anything from scissors to butcher's blades. Casually, he begins an intense discussion about local gossip, or perhaps a grisly tale about an unfortunate soul who came in for a trim and ended up as a cautionary lesson for clients. Keep your neck still, or you might end up a turkey at Sunday dinner. With a measly laugh, fear pricks at your heart as you cringe. What if you move just a little too much and leave behind an ear, or worse, a limb? With every delicate stroke, you feel a slightly ill-timed gust of cool air on your neck. Oh, don't worry about that, he shrugs while wielding a small vial. That's just the tincture of courage. Courage indeed. As he delicately trims away the last remaining strands of your dignity, you're left wondering where the bowl of strong spirit might be hiding. What if this clean-up effort turns out to be less of a cut-and-dry affair and more of a slippery plunge into the unknown? At this point, you're convinced that medieval barbers were actually masters of the arts of chance. It's gambling with every cut. Would you win a smooth finish, or a tapestry of bandages? Then again, the very same barber surgeons nicked and stitched, leaving you navigating a maze of questionable healthcare wrapped inside a tantalising shave. The best part? No chance of Yelp reviews. Whatever happens, your only witnesses are the audience of your fellow townsfolk. Some giggling, others gasping, all wondering how this whole experience is going to unfold. Ultimately, as you stand up, slightly dishevelled yet incredibly spirited, the final gamble lies within the bill offered. 2 bits might get you a basic haircut or an exquisite service of being death by razor. As you tenderly rub your neck, your glorious parasite-free neck, you ponder whether you'll ever be brave enough to face those mysterious barber tools again. Perhaps next time, you'll just stick to the goats for grooming, much less trauma in that arrangement. Because in the end, the medieval barber experience, it's truly something you can't quite put your finger on, unless you're counting the number of stitches you might need. Question: why were barber surgeons often treated like rock stars? Because they offered flamboyant, bizarre solutions to your skin's nagging issues, like horrific rashes and unsightly lesions. Between bloodletting and assorted cures, how could one resist the allure of a risky surgical solution wrapped in a charismatic package? Picture yourself sitting in the barber's chair, feeling more vulnerable than a turkey on Thanksgiving. You've got a rash that resembles something between a ripe tomato and a failed art project, and your barber, let's call him Sir Cuts-a-Lot, is giving you that look. You know the one, that twinkle in his eye that says, I can fix this with bloodshed. So, what's the plan here? First up, bloodletting. That's right, folks. Forget ointments and creams. Let's drain some life juice. You hear about this treatment from a friend who swears on his mother's grave that it cleared up his situation faster than a tavern brawl. And why wouldn't you trust Sir Cuts-a-Lot? He's wearing a cloak that looks like it survived a catfight with the wildest of sheep, and he carries what seems to be an entire butcher shop's worth of rusted tools. In medieval England, he's basically a celebrity, broadcasting on the Extreme Health Network with each haphazard slice, snip, and let's not even talk about the suctioning of those pesky leeches. Now, as he preps for the big moment, you can't help but notice the barber's tools, part of a delightful arsenal that includes everything from shiny scissors to what looks suspiciously like a garden hoe. Who knew grooming could double as a horror show? Before you can protest, he retrieves something that resembles a salad fork and proclaims it his finest cutting edge. Congratulations. You've just stepped into a world where barbers are your unlikely healers, armed with instruments that will either save your life or send you straight to the nearest funeral parlour. And let's not forget about anaesthesia. Oh wait, there isn't any. You exchange nervous glances with the other patrons, patients gone wild, who are eagerly spinning tales of miracle cures where they kept their wits about them, while Sir Cuts-a-Lot swung his instruments like a mad chef in a cooking competition. You might even spot one lucky soul boisterously reminiscing about his goal to cultivate the world's most perfect moustache, before it was promptly burned off during an unfortunate cauterization incident. Yes, you heard that right. Who doesn't love a good cautionary tale with their cut? With the sharp implements now gleaming under the flickering candlelight, Sir Cuts-a-Lot asks you if you can feel that impending tingle of excitement or dread. Your blood runs cold because, frankly, you've literally never wanted to feel less than you do right now. Relax, my friend, he bellows, raising his garden hoe like an adventurous knight. This will be fun, just a little. Pinch. And if you see black, it's just the leeches starting to carry you off to the afterlife. But the show isn't over. The performance must go on. Once you've survived the butcher's dash, I mean the delicate procedure, and after creating a lovely pool of crimson on the floor, which the next patient might enjoy for its historical significance, he proudly entwines your now tattered arm in bandages, declaring victory. Now, there's just one more thing. Some charming herbal poultices and a potion I made from a rare mushroom. Out of the corner of your eye, you see a young lad getting dragged for a completely unexpected tooth extraction. That's right, the barber surgeon doesn't just cut hair. He's also your last hope for painful dental dilemmas. You can't help but chuckle under your breath, picturing yourself screaming as you grip the armrest for dear life while he performs his next dentist gimmick, with a fervour that could rival a circus act. As you leave the establishment, barely able to process what just transpired, you glance around at your fellow townsfolk. They parade out of the barber shop, casually chatting about their experience as if they just returned from a spa retreat instead of a nightmarish artistry of scalpels and stitches. You realise that maybe you'll stick with mere regular barbers, who, if you're lucky, might know how to handle a pair of clippers without sending you into cardiac arrest. But in the whimsical world of medieval barber surgeons, every appointment could turn into a legend, a story passed down for generations about how one brave soul survived the day under the care of the questionable yet undeniably charming Sir Cuts-a-Lot. Because what is life if not a series of fascinatingly foolish decisions anyway? So, the next time you feel the urge to venture into a dusty old barber shop, remember, to bleed or not to bleed is not just a question, it's an unforgettable experience waiting to happen. Welcome to the bizarre world of leech therapy, your new best friends weighing in on your health problems. As you contemplate this slimy solution to your ailments, let's explore whether you got lucky on the treatment table or accidentally invited an army of tiny blood-slurping larvae into your life. Now before you yell, "That's disgusting," and imagine an angry cartoon leech in a lab coat with a stethoscope, let's take a stroll down the squishy side of medieval healthcare. Imagine you've just plopped down in that chair, the one that's seen enough action to tell stories of its own. You're all set for a hot hair trim and maybe some chin wagging about the latest hiccup in the village gossip mill, when your barber, whose sole medical training came from the University of Guesswork, leans over and whispers, "How about I suck out your bad humours, mate?" Yes, you heard that right. Why endure a nifty glass of something sweet when you can engage in a full-on wrestling match with nature's most unassuming, bloodthirsty critters? Leeches, those elongated little wrigglers, were all the rage back in the day, touted as miracle workers. Feeling a little off? Just get yourself a leech or 6. They're like the original blood-sucking therapists, minus the comfy chairs and warm lighting. As the gnawing sensation of impending doom popped up in your gut, there was some assurance you could vent to your leech. Let them do the dirty work as they feast on your blood, ostensibly draining away the bad humours, whatever exactly that meant. So there you sat, allowing someone to attach what looked like a small noodle to your arm, completely convinced it's a remedy for everything from headaches to heartbreaks. Of course, the relationship with leeches never came without its issues. For every tale of miraculous recovery, there's another where the leech just decided, "You know what, I'm actually quite fond of your leg." Imagine sitting there all calm, thinking no leech could possibly go rogue, and bam! One of them decides your appendage is its new home, staying behind long after its meal. Just picture it. Your legs suddenly feel a little too light, and your buddy is latching on for a long-term engagement. Great. Now you've traded a short-term relationship for a long-binding agreement with nature's little vampires. But wait. Romanticising these slimy squatters doesn't stop there. Once our leechy friend is munched down, it also releases a delightful blend of anticoagulants. Fancy words meaning that your blood won't clot. Yes, no band-aids here. You might bleed for a while, leaving more room for trouble. Join me in envisioning a medieval doctor asking with unwavering confidence, "Is that blood on the carpet? Or just a bit of leeching therapy gone awry?" How the town crier would delight in reporting, "Citizen loses limb to leech. Local barber on the lam." Your trip for wellness could very well turn into a cautionary tale whispered with the same enthusiasm as the legend of the town's giant rat, whose diet included more than just cheese. These charismatic little beasts weren't just about attitude. They played a hefty role in community law too. As you settled in for your hourly leech therapy binge, your barber would regale you with tales of noblemen who had sworn allegiance to their leeches. "Ah, villager Greg got a leech attached at last month's market and hasn't seen a cold since." Feeble proof perhaps, but nothing like the tapestry these stories wove. Just imagine, while you're lying there, gruesomely giddy, the leech lodged so firmly into your arm that you can hear the barber's stories mixing with the sound of your heart thudding. Thud, 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 blood flowing out, possible hope flowing in. And there was no shortage of leeches to go around. They were the bad boyfriends of the medieval medical world, looking all oozy and charming, but ultimately up for anyone's affection. Towns started bartering these svelte rubies by the dozen, making leeches the new medical accessory. "Why is your arm so slim?" "Oh, just got a leech today." They're excellent for ensuring your humours remain more balanced than those of the village drunkard. So the next time you feel a tickle in your throat or pitter-patter in your bones, just remember how, back then, a leech could have been your go-to answer. a little bloodsucker's creed for health that could either leave you dancing in delight or reeling in regret, depending on how willing you were to enjoy your slimy sidekicks. For every success, however, there remained the lurking fear that your relationship with these slippery companions might take a turn for the worse. At least today, dodging medical advice about leech therapy is one of the few choices many of us can proudly make. Who knew you could be safer in the hands of a blacksmith if you yourself were in dire need of surgery? Join us as we explore one of the biggest trade-offs of the medieval period between compulsory barber art and hopefully better trained actual surgeons, lest you become the laughingstock of the town. Picture this. You're roaming the bustling market square, filled with the sounds of cattle lowing, children shrieking, and the distinct aroma of questionable meat wafting through the air. You stumble upon your local barber, who's simultaneously trimming a wealthy nobleman's beard and waving at a chicken like they've just shared an inside joke. Now, in this chaotic renaissance of questionable medical practices, barbers were your go-to for everything from haircuts to surgery. And yes, that even included your broken bones or a nasty abscess that's becoming a delicately fragrant accessory on your leg. If you deemed it best to visit your barber rather than an actual surgeon, you might find yourself not just with a snazzy new haircut, but also with a side helping of bloodletting, or worse, an extraction of your infected appendage using tools that had seen more battles than you ever will. It's like a 2-for-1 deal, except the only thing getting cut is probably not just your hair. Barber surgeons held a curious status. A good haircut and herbal remedies were just par for the course. Their more theatrical surgical skills relied heavily on how charming their chatter was, and how much ale they had consumed prior to your unfortunate visit. A perilous combination, especially if you're pinned to a rickety table that smells like the barn floor. Oh wait, it probably was the barn floor. While the nobleman's getting his beard trimmed with the utmost care, you could be risking life and limb while being the subject of a truly horrific surgical lecture. Just think! There you are, cold sweat trickling down your back, while your barber explains how he's had great success with all his previous patients. You recall fondly his last case, a man who emerged from treatment missing not just a limb, but his ability to remember his own name. Meanwhile, the real surgeons, those who tended to churn out populated myths about discrediting barber art, while subtly sipping on herbal teas, often spent years honing actual skills. But good luck trying to find one of those wizards of medicine. They were rarer than an honest poet in a marketplace filled with vendor frauds. Oftentimes those surgeons tisked about their barber counterparts in hushed tones, and then proceeded to charge you more than your entire livestock, just to examine you while waving their fancy tools that looked suspiciously like they belonged in a gothic novel. And what about the waiting rooms? If you had the misfortune to choose the surgeon over the barber, you might soon learn that waiting to be seen felt like playing Russian roulette with your life. Why? Because the line to be cured was long, often rivaling the lines to purchase bread for the week. As you waited, you'd see loitering patients emerge for their appointments, looking rather worse than they entered, as if they'd just stumbled into a cooking pot clean out at the butcher's. The catch-22 was the allure of an actual surgery performed under the pretense of safer conditions, which camouflaged just as much risk, ultimately leaving it to fate or skill, whichever one you signed your life over to first. And should you seek out the blacksmith instead? Well, they had the tools, the know-how, and none of the gory theatrics of a barber surgeon. Are they going to swing their hammer like they're shaping a sword, or are they going to whip out their tongs like they're hoping to reposition your shoulder? It's a gamble you wouldn't always want to make, but your options felt oddly limited. If only everyone knew that just about anyone capable of hitting things with a hammer could also double as a wannabe surgeon. It wasn't the best option, but the blacksmiths had a knack for straightening out broken bits. Your bones, that is, not your broken dreams. Alas, the medieval landscape for seekers of surgical miracles illustrates that you may have better luck in the market's bustling clamour than trudging painfully to a clinic of questionable skill, where the barber's endless chatter was a dizzying distraction from whatever dread awaited you. Choose wisely, dear listener, because between barber surgeons and blacksmiths, you'd learn that medieval healing could often be much like experiencing a strange comedy, where the punchline is you waking up with a parrot perched on your shoulder and a bad haircut to boot. What's the most outrageous thing a medieval barber could charge you for? Strap in for outrageous haircuts that double as wild tales of anxiety and vanity. Between the myths, feuds, and scary stories, just how belligerently inflated were a barber's own tales about their clientele? Imagine, if you will, sitting in the barber's chair, an ancient wooden contraption that squeaks ominously beneath your weight, while the barber leans in with conspiratorial glee, his eyes twinkling with the promise of a story more fantastic than the last hairstyle you endured. In every town square, the barber shop served not just as a place for trims and shaves, but as a hub of gossip and embellishment. You could pay for a haircut, sure, but better than that. You could gain access to the best local drama, who had just attempted to steal the Lord's pig, or whose wife was caught flirting with the baker. Often, the real cost of your grooming came not just from the blades, but from the relentless extravagance of the barber's spiels. "Oh, you thought you merely wanted a simple hairstyle," he'd say, flipping his first-rate scissors with theatrical flair. "What you truly need is a daring warrior's cut, revered by knights of old who sought glorious conquest." And this is where the barber's marketing genius shines brighter than the sun reflecting off a freshly shorn scalp. Each trim comes with a backstory, making you feel like part of something grander. He'd regale customers with tales of a nobleman whose hair was so lavishly styled that enemies abroad cowered at the glory of his appearance alone. "You too can instill fear with your next cut," he would proclaim, and who knows? In a world where appearances could lead to swift or eternal infamy, perhaps he wasn't far off. Speaking of appearances, have you ever seen a picture of a medieval noble? No. Well, you're in good company, because medieval nobles didn't take kindly to being portrayed with anything less than vibrant embellishment. Imagine going into battle already draped in a rich velvet cloak and a crown that shines like the sun, only to have your barber put you on display with a hairstyle that looks less heroic knight and more confused poodle. Those are some serious stakes, and that's exactly why magicians, barbers, often pumped up their tails to reflect such gravity. Among the more interesting barbers, you'd find one or two who claimed to have Kudrat, the hair whisperer himself, as their inspiration. It was said that any cut given by him would ensure not only a strong and flexible character in battle, but also the capability to charm even the most reluctant lady into swooning. A haircut could make or break your future, and barbers were eager to share their shortcuts to these meteorically prestigious hairstyles. But let us not forget the inevitable misfires of haircutting magic. Bob the Brave, who'd just been through a particularly rough batch of ale, stepped into the barber's lair demanding what he boldly called a shorn warrior look. Not one to back down, our barber obliged. An hour later, Bob stumbled out in sheer horror. He had a look that could only be described as badger meets sheep. His friends burst out laughing, and he soon became the subject of yet another barber legend. They say the last warrior to challenge Bob was eaten alive by his haircut, became a peculiar tale in the square, and Bob's reputation morphed as quickly as his hair fell. It's these tales, enhanced by both laughter and embarrassment, that weave a tapestry of social stature, vanity, and the wild, unpredictable world of medieval barbering. Alongside gossip of haircuts big enough to rival castles, the barber's charm extended to the psychological realm, offering a blend of mystique and health elixirs that would make a modern-day snake oil salesman blush in envy. These hair-raising stories of inflated egos and charming exaggerations are just a small slice of what life was like for the brave souls who entered barbershops in the Middle Ages. So as you recline in the comfort of your modern barber's chair, remember, your historic pals had their own elaborate forms of therapy, and if you happen to catch your barber spinning a tale that sounds a little too outrageous, take heart. For in that moment, you too have entered a culture of filling the mundane with a miraculous one wild haircut at a time. Avoid a midlife crisis or an existential crisis while sitting unsuspecting in a barber's chair, and find out if those brave enough to embark on a rumspring, a medieval rite of passage, in search of personal freedom ended up regretting the decision to sit in front of a rusty razor. You see, in the 14th century, once you reached a certain age, usually around your late teens, it was customary for young people to break free from the monotony of peasant chores and venture out into the world, sort of a trial run of adulthood without a full commitment. If you're imagining a carefree joyride across the countryside with no one to answer to, think again. This expedition often involved working a dozen odd jobs while trying to survive the incessant hazards of both nature and life's questionable charms. Now picture this. You're a naive young lad wandering into a bustling village, the aroma of freshly baked bread and the lively chatter of people vibrating through the air. Deciding to visit the local barber for a clean shave, you stumble headfirst into a world of horror. These barbers were notorious for bringing more stories of pain than pleasure. Seated in a rickety wooden chair, you realise just how serious your quest for independence might get. Surely this would be a simple trim, right? But here's the kicker. Those trimmings often had you wondering if your barber's version of a clean shave involved a chipped blade and a fatalistic approach to personal grooming. Let's dive deeper into the motivations behind this mad dash to experience independence during a rumspringer. What fueled these young adventurers? Alcohol, curiosity, or a charming peer pressure to become a local legend? Maybe it was a mix of all three, as misguided souls would flock to the local tavern for courage. 1 pint too many, combined with a generous slice of youthful foolishness, would see them swaggering into that barber shop without a second thought. Talk about a service that served both as a hairstyle and a solid shot at life reflection, because between the whiskey and worry, they'd certainly left their sanity at the door. You've plopped down in the chair, the barber gives you a friendly nod, and just after you sign your fate away with a drunken laugh, the sheer horror of your situation begins to unfold. The chair, carved from some long-lost tree that had probably gone out in a blaze of glory, creaks ominously beneath you. Is that the sound of dread? Or just your own stomach rebelling against the ale you downed like it was water? As the barber readies his lethal tools, you can't help but question your life choices, especially those that led you to this particular moment where one slip could lead to a bad haircut, and undoubtedly an even worse reputation. But fear not. This is also your chance to weave a tale of bravery. Perhaps you'll bewitch women with your stories of daring escapades. After all, nothing screams romance quite like, I survived a barber surgery from a half-drunk you can't make this up barber. Nothing says charm like sporting a hairstyle that resembles the aftermath of a barnyard brawl, accompanied by a wild leap in your blood pressure that makes your friends believe your bravery transcends the limits of mere mortality. But it doesn't always end dramatically. Perhaps your experience will be a simple, shaggy trim that won't even raise eyebrows. Just one of those forgettable adventures that look quaint in the grand guidebook of life. You proudly showcase your haircut as if you marshalled through realms of danger, when in reality, you merely escaped with only a few questionable snips. After all, in a life brimming with mundane chores, how often do you get the chance to say, I almost lost my ear but emerged victorious with a sheepdog look? As you stumble out into the sunlight, your hair now swaying in questionable directions, you might feel a flood of confidence washing over you, albeit half from the liquor and half from the exhilaration of surviving the barber's wrath. By now, your adventure has become a badge of honour, a story to share around the village, making your rumspringer worth every dizzy moment. So next time you think of a rumspringer, just remember, it's not merely about unchained youth. It's about embracing risk, wild shenanigans, and knowing that sometimes your adventures may lead you to surprising heights, or eyebrow-raising hairstyles. Indeed, no one said growing up was going to be clean-cut. Picture a world where medieval barbers offer two distinct flavours of service, luxurious styles for nobles and the quick shave special for the stressed peasantry. How would you fare under such a system? Would you beg for a fresh cut or just let half your beard go wild? In medieval Europe, the hierarchy of society dictated not just your daily existence, but even the quality of your haircut. Nobles would strut into the barbershop with all the elegance of an aristocratic peacock, expecting nothing less than artistry worthy of a royal portrait. Meanwhile, a humble peasant trudged in with dirt beneath their nails, praying for a trim that wouldn't leave them looking like a wandering sheep. Imagine the scene. The nobleman reclines on a plush seat made of fine velvet, urged on by the fragrant scent of lavender wafting from the barber's oils. Meanwhile, the peasant squats on a rickety stool, his only rest coming from the dubious business of a wooden plank propped against an unwashed wall. The barber's skills noticeably shift depending on the clientele. For the rich, the barber might even incorporate a subtle scalp massage, or at least a hopeful hope that the cuts of meat from last week's feast didn't stick just a little too closely to his fingers while grooming. The nobleman receives thoughtful conversation on politics and fashion, while the peasant, well, he's lucky if he can finish his dignified silence before the daunting clip of shears strips him of what little honour remains in his shaggy locks. This stratified experience created a barber-client relationship reminiscent of an unconventional wedding ceremony. The nobles would often stop by for lavish details, such as intricate braids, highlights with imaginative roots, and conversing on the latest trends, surely initiated by the last roaring banquet they attended. For 3 pence they could leave with a floral crown on their hair fit for a king. On the contrary, the peasant bared all for a couple of crawled pennies, returning home to a family wondering if they had budgeted their grains for the week wisely. Commoners, desperate for respectable appearances without financial ruin, had to resort to risky alternatives. They might turn to their more fortunate friends or family members, who ironically, after a pint or two of ale, might not distinguish between a craft cut or a full-on murder mystery. It's less of a scissors are flying, and more of a sheer improvisation. Just pray your uncle wasn't the one holding the shears that day. But let us not overlook the barber's monumental dilemma. Would he dare to mix noble styles with plebeian requests? The peasant approaches in fear, desperately asking for a copy of the nobleman's haircut, resulting in the barber stifling the urge to laugh. Turning scissors away from eyes and toward the moral quandary of fate and fashion, he instead offers a humble trim that resembles more of a roaming wildflower than the neat, tidy grass of a manicured lawn. Think of the hilarity. Picture this. A notable noble coated with the latest pomp in court gossip is out of town while his barber secretly explores wild ideas, leaving bets on whether he can transform a peasant into a cutthroat look before dinner. "Do you have any fine gentleman's pomade?" the peasant inquires, eager for a luscious wax rather than earwax from the almighty nobleman's fancy. Yet, in a way, these haircuts became vessels of more than just appearances. They encapsulated an entire class-based social dynamic. For while the nobleman had people to ensconce him in flattering colours and lavish curls, the peasant risked being associated with the barber's questionable sanitation practices. Practices that could strip him of half his scalp or, worse yet, involve a leech regrettably cut from the barber's leeching clientele and stuck hanging around just to give the service a little character. Eventually the barber finishes the job. The nobleman leaves triumphantly, holding his head high, while the peasant staggers out. Sure, maybe with less hair, but at least with a fun story about how he almost received a complimentary mole's eye view haircut on that last attempt. In this world of unequal cuts, hair truly reflected status, whims, and a touch of medieval absurdity. Each clash of shears tells a tale of survival, wit, and humorous confrontation between those who sought to style and those who simply sought to survive. The next time you walk into a barbershop and see an array of gentlemanly styles, take a moment to imagine the noble traditions of old, where haircuts had the power to dictate who flourished and who merely fluttered, like a poorly styled flower fighting with the wind, all while seated on a less than reliable farmhouse stool. Did you ever imagine your barber might know a remedy for the plague? Spoilers. They didn't, but didn't let that stop them. Your local barber surgeon was probably at the forefront of serving medical solutions, resisting desperate patients who expected to see miracles and crying at the pit stains from sheer uncertainty. That's right. While you were there asking for a nice trim and perhaps a sweet fade, your barber was prepping for a second career in what happens if everything goes horribly wrong, because nothing screams trust me, quite like a razor-sharp blade in the hands of a guy 2 drinks deep. Imagine this scene. You waltz into the barber shop expecting a snappy haircut and some gossip about the latest village scandal. Instead, you're greeted with the sight of the barber pulling an assortment of dubious herbs and odd potions out of a dusty cabinet. "Ah, my friend, are you feeling a bit under the weather? I know just the thing," he booms, and what was supposed to be a simple haircut suddenly cascades into a spirit-fueled discussion on the magical properties of ground-up bat wings and how they might just cure your vague, ceaseless malaise. Now, how did barbers gain such an alarming amount of medical authority? It turns out that during medieval times, the lines between barbering and medicine were as blurred as a painter's palette after too many swirls. With the backdrop of the bubonic plague, which I must say isn't your standard patient, barbers began assuming the role of makeshift physicians because, well, someone had to treat the peasantry and no one else was stepping up. Don't get me wrong, barbers often came equipped with enough tools to perform a surgery that would leave you questioning your life choices. But what you wouldn't recognise might be the bizarre blend of hair clippings and bandages strewn about the floor, remnants of last week's easy tooth extraction gone wrong, or what your barber is now referring to as an impromptu surgery. It's the medieval version of picking up takeout from a restaurant you never plan to return to. When it's gone wrong, everyone collectively gasps and chooses lies instead of their usual buzz. As the plague ravaged through town, countless souls sought the barber's expertise as a last-ditch effort to treat everything from coughs to rashes. Now, granted, a barber's toolkit comprised of scissors, razors, and the lurking threat of infection. But when a massive epidemic is knocking at your door, you might opt for the guy who cuts hair and once read a medical book over an ordinary ceramic pot of boiled weeds. The barber thus transitioned from your local stylist to an eccentric healer who could apply a salve and take a little off the top. Follicular and facial concerns were now paired with grave existential crises. Right at this crossroads stood the ever-burgeoning trend of bloodletting once more, a favourite of amateurish barber surgeons looking to shed excess ailments, in more ways than one. In a moment of sheer madness, or shall we say desperation, the barber would take out his trusty blade and make an intentional slice to drain what he believed was bad blood. And just like that, patients found themselves dabbling in what's now a comical tournament of how much blood should we spill today? Imagine the town square, a bold impression of medieval chaos. young and old alike wandering tentatively to the barber's den, nervously eyeing the potential for an age-old treatment, followed by the fear of actually coming away with your limbs intact. In one moment, a neighbourhood kid could be asking for a clean shave, and the next a peasant is being told, "Don't worry, this leech will totally help with your terminal fever." Yes, once I get done prepping the herbs brewed with goat sweat, we will totally fix you up. The hazy logic was simple. If the barber couldn't help you, then surely he'd collect your last gossip and send you off with an open wound and mild embarrassment. How's that for closure? Still, amidst this brooding despair, any good barber would flip the narrative. Well, at least your haircut will look good when you pass on into oblivion. So the next time you think about heading to the barber's shop, perhaps take a moment to remember the myriad ways your stylist might have moonlighted in a jug of dubious remedies at some point in medieval history. Amidst the razors, the bizarre concoctions, and the escaping microbes, was there indeed a sense of camaraderie or humour as your haircut turned into an unintended experiment? Probably not, but wouldn't that make for a splendid chapter in barbering history? With so many out there embracing their health in the hands of an amateur surgeon, being seen in public demand that you rock that fresh cut, and possibly chairside you just experienced a terrifying but oddly humorous medical drama. What a time to be alive. Barber surgeons and mysterious mysticism. From catches of fate to wayward spirits possessing your vigour, the mystical world surrounding barber surgeons outpaced their actual medical knowledge. How would you like to put your health in the hands of a master steeped in folklore? Just sit back and let the stories wash over you. Picture this. You've just stepped into a medieval barber's shop where the sign on the door reads haircuts, shaves and cures. A triple threat not known for its cleanliness or medical accuracy. The air is dense with the mingled scents of sweat, wood shavings, and something that might only be called curiously unidentifiable. Here, your barber isn't just a mere stylist. They're an amateur surgeon, a soap maker, and sometimes even your local oracle. You wonder if they'll offer you a complimentary tarot reading with your haircut, or maybe a rune casting to see if you're doomed to a long life of discomfort or a short one filled with questionable hairstyles. As you take an unsteady seat in the rickety chair, likely the same one that has supported generations of patrons and possibly a goat or two, you can't help but feel the weight of history hovering over you. It's rumoured that in the back rooms of most barbershops, sinister talismans are on display alongside an unsettling collection of medicinal herbs, each with a backstory more tangled than a wyvern's boss battle in a high fantasy novel. Of course, if you ask your barber about them, you'll be treated to harrowing tales of woe. Legend has it, the last guy who tried to complain about his haircut ended up with a sock full of leeches and a prediction of a bad crop year. But no pressure, right? You hear whispers about how barber surgeons would sometimes invoke the spirits of the past while performing their surgeries. Want a nice clean shave and a cure for your cough? Not a problem. Just sit tight while the barber recites an incantation to ward off the evil spirits that might be hiding in your tonsils. After all, who wouldn't trust the fella holding a blade to their neck while juggling superstition and surgical ineptitude? Excuse me while I clutch my throat in horror. And let's not forget about the remarkable confidence these barber surgeons had in their cures. Instead of relying on sterile techniques, they often engaged in spiritual healing through rituals that would make modern medical practitioners absolutely shudder, and also probably call for backup. Imagine convincing a headache-prone villager that layers of herbs tied to their left wrist with a strand of their own hair would pretty much fix them up in a matter of hours. The herbalist claimed it was medically valid, while the barber quietly swept up the placebo effects of their polished sales pitch. But for every bizarre concoction or hair-raising story, there existed a pragmatic side to these rituals. It wasn't just about mystical marbles and mischief. It was about finding ways to soothe patients in an age when death was just a sneeze away. One could argue that a good spin on ancient superstition made the act of getting your blood drawn, or teeth pulled, slightly more palatable. A well-timed joke about the Grim Reaper as you saw the barber approaching with a rusty tool might just stave off a complete meltdown, or at least keep the neighbours entertained. As the barber draws closer with a blade that gleams ominously under the flickering light, you have to weigh your options. Your fate is truly in their hands. Are you getting a haircut for looks or luck? Do they care about your ability to sidestep bad fortune? Or are they simply savouring the lively comedy of a life itself? To be honest, it could go either way. In the shuffle of the mystical and the mundane, you'd find your own belief system swirling. Maybe you start viewing your haircut as a transaction of faith, a test of your luck sprinkled with equal parts courage and desperation. Ultimately, your barber might just finish up with a flourish, spitting prophecy as they snip away, and offering you a discount on your next trip if you promise not to die before your next visit. And just like that, whether you leave feeling like a particularly dapper peacock, or frantically wondering if you'll summon demons during your next family gathering, one thing is for certain. Visiting a barber surgeon was never just about a mere trim. It was a plunge into a lifestyle where every haircut threatened to spiral into an epic saga of superstition, folklore, and sheer unpredictable comedy. The kind that would ensure your tales lived on for generations, or until the next unfortunate haircut. So, here's to the brave souls who dared to trust their locks and lives to the mystical mid-ages. Crazy patient antics often overshadow the serious work of medieval barbers, didn't they? Picture this. You, the hapless tourist somehow walking into a young apprentice's first day on the job. Hold on to your hat because surgery is about to get very real, or at least very loud. As you step through the rickety door of the barbershop, a cacophony of shouts and the unmistakable sounds of awkwardly whirling instruments hits your ears. Can you smell the mix of sweat, fear, and the lingering aroma of questionable ointments? It's a sensory overload, reminiscent of a circus gone horribly wrong. Except, it's a circus where you're just a spectator waiting for someone to leap into a lion's mouth any moment. You spot the apprentice, nervously clutching the barber's tools, his hands trembling like a fawn trying to stand for the first time. He's been tasked with a great honour today, the care of a particularly raucous patron who seems to believe he's just strolled out of a heroic epic. Instead, he's likely the protagonist of a comedic tragedy. How did he get here? Imagine him on a night out at the local tavern. Too many tankards of ale later, he decides he's ready for a hairstyle that will inspire songs and ballads instead of pitying looks. Spoiler alert, he will leave with a very different kind of story. As the apprentice carefully drapes the cape over the patron, you can't help but overhear murmurs about some poor soul who had previously endured the full haircut and surgery combo, and now boasted a bandaged head and a questionable haircut he couldn't hide behind a hat. That's not the look you want when heading home, you think, bracing yourself as the new barber begins the dreaded trim. But it's not just the cutting that makes you grip the edge of your seat, it's the unpredictability of the patrons. Next door, a surgeon might have the privilege of polite clientele, but here it's more like a poignant reality show contest. One patron sways drunkenly, proclaiming he's invincible until he slumps onto another barber's chair, his attempt to charm the young barber having resulted in nothing but a face full of shaving cream. You can't help but laugh. Would he be the cautionary tale for future patrons? Just imagine his funeral. He died in pursuit of the perfect quiff. Then there's the group that burst through the door, no shirts, deliberate chaos in their eyes, and they're hollering about an epic feud regarding sheep. Yes, sheep. A Apparently, they're convinced that whoever has the best haircut will be allowed to take the sheep shearing trophy. Cue a goat sound manufactured competition outside, with barbers scrambling to manage stitches while keeping their customers safe from wayward sheep. A true display of multitasking or sheer folly, the line could not be clearer. In the corner, an older gentleman, slightly wobbly, has somehow managed to become an all-time barber's nightmare. He's expressing deep philosophical thoughts about the universe, mortality, and quite possibly the point of hair at all. "Hair has souls," he belches dramatically, shocking the apprentice who might as well be a deer in headlights. Just how many souls is he looking to unleash during this cutting session? The poor apprentice is left to ponder things like knife angles and random musings about hair being a bridge to other worlds. But remember, as devastating as it may be, the barber is forced into a formidable balancing act between the ordinary and the insane. He's got these characters swapping stories, demanding attention while trying to cut, sew and yell commands amidst Lord knows what debauchery going on. Ultimately, the barber slashes through hair in sheer confusion, restoring some semblance of order while sipping on his own cup of muttering sanity, and likely beer if he's lucky. Amidst the laughter and shenanigans, however, lies the glaring truth. These antics highlight how barbers were perceived in society's eyes. They were not only the purveyors of styles and cures, but also the earnest entertainers tasked with dealing with intoxicated patrons and their whims. It's not just a job, it's an ongoing performance of ancient rituals, rudimentary surgeries, and the undeniable flavour of absurdity. So, the next time you find yourself in a quaint modern barbershop, silently perhaps, thank them for not having to live through the days of chaotic history where your quick trim could result in miles of medical complications, or at the very least, a mildly entertaining tale to tell. Welcome to the world of medieval barbers, where the only guarantee is that something entertaining, or terrifying, is always just around the corner. Explore the intimate moments of a medieval barber's chair and contemplate how terror, panic, or humour take place in those 15 minutes. Did your barber ever reconsider a life choice or decide to keep their personal drama tucked beneath that ominous waiting cape? Imagine, if you will, a smooth-talking barber, scissor in hand, regaling you with tales of his past heartbreaks, all while pretending your hair is just a minor detail in his twisted, dramatic life. You slip into the chair, nervously glancing up at the rusted mirror reflecting not just your face, but perhaps an alternate reality where you didn't come in for a haircut. Your heart races. Are those tears a sign of regret, or just the after effects of being too close to that burning candle? So, what goes through your barber's head? Is he mentally prepping for his upcoming performance, perhaps stepping into character as that suave, dependable figure, yet managing to look like he slept in a straw-filled barn? With each snip of the scissors, he might ponder, is this haircut saving or ruining a life today? Am I truly the hair artist I aspired to be, or just a glorified butcher of locks? It's a fine line between a masterpiece and a complete disaster, and your head is the canvas. One slip of the blade, and you've just transitioned from a sheepish peasant to the subject of a town-wide laugh fest. As you settle back in the chair, you can't help but ponder your own existence. Here you are, a temporary creature residing in the limbo of a barbershop, surrounded by goopy ointments and strange tools that seem more suited for performing an impromptu surgery than shaping your sideburns. You wonder how many people before you have sat here, facing the ultimate existential crisis while the barber delivers their hairline's fate. Would the salty tears of a butchered barbering reflect your life's failures? Or was that young apprentice learning the ropes behind him, the one wielding the scissors, going to shine in the spotlight someday? However, there's also a ridiculousness to the entire situation. You glance at the barber's own head, a tufted mess reminding you of a crow's nest tangled in a windstorm. Is he really trying to convince you that he has the authority to reshape your own locks, when his look screams accident waiting to happen? The duality of emotions, your impending personal crisis entwined with your barber's comedic mismanagement, is enough to fuel your surreal daydreams. Deep within your thoughts, you consider the brutal honesty behind that mirror. What stories lurk behind your back as he meticulously shapes your hair? In this moment, is he strategizing his next move? Conquer the hair, or strategically dodge inquiries about his latest escapade with a certain barmaid? Will he share that time his beloved butter churn went missing right before the harvest festival? Or will he keep the gory details hidden behind that warm, charismatic smile? Just as you get lost in your thoughts about medieval gossip, the nobleman's latest scandal, or the rumour mill surrounding the town's blacksmith, you catch a whiff of something dreadful. What is that stink? Ah, yes, the aroma of unwashed hands being sported under the barber's cape, accompanied by the echoes of discontent as he drags that electrified blade ever closer to your ears. You ponder, would it be too drastic to bail out of this hair-cutting adventure half-shorn, just to escape the inevitable fate caused by an unsteady hand? And then there's the palpable tension in the air, like watching a live-action cliffhanger. Each snip brings you 1 inch closer to realising you're all just players on a deliciously absurd stage. Whether it's the barber's burgeoning career or your own questionable life choices that brought you there, one thing is clear. You've both become entangled in a hilarious, hair-raising tango of survival, wrapped in a soft cape. At the end of that 15-minute sojourn, the barber sets down his tools, fluffs your final look, and gives you that proud "look what I did" glint in his eye. You escape the chair, hoisting your newfound identity, part self-made masterpiece, part unintentional comedy. As you step away, leaving behind the barber's trials and tribulations, you're left to contemplate not just your hairstyle, but the absurd yet oddly familiar faces of those who once navigated these chairs, struggling with the same struggles as you. So, embrace the absurdity of it all, the blame, the humour, the hair, and remember, in the end, everyone leaves a little more untangled and thrust into the laughter of life. Join us for a deep dive into a medieval apprentice's life. Imagine starting your career as an unwitting guinea pig filled with mistakes and regrets as you learn to wield the scissors of fate and manage the chaos of arrogant patrons and flammable instruments. Yikes! That's right, your journey begins at the bustling door of a barber surgeon shop, where the walls echo with laughter, screams, and the unmistakable sound of hair being mercilessly shaved off. One moment you're an eager novice, excited to learn the trade. The next you're surrounded by an exquisite blend of sweat, blood, and unfiltered ego that makes you question every life decision leading up to this point. As you don your apprentice apron, which is less of a fashion statement and more of a bib for inevitable spills, you quickly realise that hygiene in the medieval world is an illusion maintained by sheer force of will. In a room hopping with oily barbers, you might wonder if that mysterious aroma wafting through the air is leftover pottage or just the accumulated scent of despair from the last patient gone awry. You brace yourself because the real learning starts now. The first lesson: don't give the patrons a reason to take their frustrations out on you. Of course, it's a challenge when one unwittingly snips away a bit too much, transforming a gentleman into a wandering madman who's just received a cursed haircut. Picture yourself, scissors in one hand, a melting candle in the other, making that terrifying visual leap between a nobleman's crisp look and what could only be referred to as the accidental goat. Your heart races as he storms out, vowing to take his grievances straight to the Lord's court, armed with nothing but hair clippings and bruised egos. As you buckle under the fiery glares of disgruntled customers, You begin to understand that not only is it your hands that are at stake, but also your very soul. Math may teach you how to count change, but the real math here involves dodging frustrated patrons and calculating how many steps it takes to escape the combo of insanity and hazardous tools. It gets worse as your master decides to throw you into various jobs that would make anyone's skin crawl. Think barbers are just cutting hair? Wrong! You're suddenly thrust into bloodletting sessions where you have to learn the delicate art of draining life out of patrons, both literally and figuratively. It's not the hair-raising excursion you expected, that's for sure. Instead, you find yourself struggling to hold a squirming patient steady, all the while battling a flood of phobias about whether this causes more harm than good. Has the ancient practice of let's see how much blood we can get from this guy ever really helped anyone? Unlikely. Then there's the dreaded moment when you accidentally knock over your master's prized leech jar. Yes, true story. Those creepy little bloodsuckers spill across the floor like tiny, moist monsters. Your master's face ignites with rage as he scolds you for your carelessness, reminding you that the world's reliance on these creatures is one step shy of lunacy. You scramble to pick them up while pretending they're not actually slippery tentacles that belong in another dimension. You feel like a contestant in the world's grossest medieval quality game show, where losing means painful humiliation. And just when you think it can't get worse, there's a surprising twist. In the barber's chaotic world, you realise what it takes to fit in. A balance of absurd feats, sharp scissors and damning words of wisdom. You learn to crack jokes to deflect the pain of chaos around you, and suddenly you become the primary source of comic relief. Hey, at least I didn't knock over the whole shelf of scalpels. I fished out the leeches, didn't I? Is your comedic mantra. The laughter, however, is also a thin veil for anxiety, as you know your journey is more than just learning to master those terrifying tools of the trade. So you strive to embrace this madness as a rite of passage, a life marked by dramatic missteps and bizarre lessons that deepen your fondness for pottages made from ancient recipe books. Over time, the fear of patrons transforms into a fondness for the friendships you forge amidst the chaos, a bond punctuated by shared mistakes and a mutual understanding of how not to end up as a cautionary tale in the town square. By accepting the absurdities of your apprenticeship, you come to terms with the roller coaster of haircuts, leeches, and bloodletting plots. After all, who knew that a lifetime spent with scissors could transform into the hilariously torturous quest for solace amid a whirlwind of snipping identities? So here's to the path of chaos that every barber's apprentice walks, where every mistake becomes a story and every haircut is more than just hair, it's a lesson in survival. From dubious beauty regimens to outright potions, hear all about the misleading advice a medieval barber could rope you into. Is drinking goat's bile really a way to solve all your problems? It might just seem like it after a rough day at the barber shop. Picture yourself sitting in the wooden chair, a nervous knot in your stomach, as the barber examines your hair with a look that screams, "I'm about to give you a makeover straight from the depth of my questionable potion cabinet." Welcome to the intriguing yet terrifying world of medieval barbers, where remedies ran the risk of being more dangerous than the ailments themselves. Let's set the scene. You're surrounded by the fragrant, and by fragrant I mean overwhelmingly rancid, aroma of various herbs, concoctions, and perhaps even the occasional goat hoof. The barber might have a few familiar tinctures on the shelf, but the mystery ones, oh, those are the real treasures. Picture a sign hanging ominously on the wall reading, "Why bother with current medicine when you can drink something that's been brewing since before your great-grandfather's time?" You see, barbers apprentice not only at the hands of their masters, those wise in the ways of cutting hair, but also under the unfortunately misguided tutelage of barber surgeons, who doubled as folk healers. Imagine one patient, let's call him Sir Dandling. Sir Dandling wanders in for a simple trim, but between his split ends and the dubious medicinal elixir the barber just made fresh, he is soon wrapped not just in the chair but in a web of ancient remedies. Just a splash of horse urine and a pinch of powdered bat wing will do wonders for those split ends, your barber might exclaim, waving a flask that looks like it belonged to a witch. You're left to ponder if perhaps this guy just finished a game of medieval truth or dare and didn't quite take the stakes seriously enough. Just when you thought that was as absurd as it could get, enter the infamous swallowing of goat's bile remedy. The annual medieval beauty pageant was nothing compared to the lengths people went to achieve hair that could shine like a knight's armour in the midday sun. Now, if you've ever been dared to try something that sounds less than appetising, imagine those barbers, including your beloved barber surgeon, recommending a concoction considering that goat's bile somehow held the secrets to luscious locks. You may find yourself questioning whether your hair really does look flatter than a pancake today, or if it's just the slightly fermented goat product setting off alarm bells, causing you to reconsider your life choices as you hover over the bucket. And if you think that was the end of it, let's not forget outlandish cures for hair loss, sure to embarrass even the most courageous medieval knights. Ever wanted a luxurious mane as impressive as a lion's? Then get ready for the synergistic blend of some foul-smelling grease swirled in beet juice and, notoriously, human urine. Yes, you heard that right. The typical medieval barber wasn't just concerned about cutting your hair. They wanted you battling baldness with a unique blend that would perfume you more like last week's dinner than a royal soiree. But what about those who spiced things up a bit more, like medieval herbalists, who turned up with vials labelled magic elixir of eternal youth? These elixirs could range from the mildly effective to absolute tomfoolery, and didn't always produce the miracles promised. Have you ever considered dandelion root tea would enhance your curls? Spoiler alert, it won't. But it's the conclusion many professional barbers turned amateur chemists arrived at. Charmingly misleading, they somehow believed that the more elaborate the claim, the more people would buy in. And by buy in, I mean financially and quite literally. In this medieval barbershop where thought collided with chaos, the lines blurred between haircuts and hangovers, hygiene and hilarity. When you finally exited into the street, walk with your friends, hair brimming with enthusiasm thanks to goat's droppings mixed with a hint of lavender, or whatever charming concoction you just tried. Be prepared for a giggle or a judgment depending on who's passing by, and whether they're well acquainted with common sense or simply looking for a laugh. So next time you think about those old wives' remedies, remember Sir Dandling's day in the barber chair, and count your lucky stars that you don't have to search for the freshest goat bile or chase down someone for a reasonable haircut these days. Because, let's face it, if it doesn't come with a saturated fat warning, you're probably in the clear. Ever wondered what it's like to pay the ultimate price for a haircut gone wrong? Hold tight as we go through the moments when patrons sadly discover that their appearance-enhancing thrills might turn into horror when the barber just isn't having a good day. Imagine stepping into a bustling medieval barber surgeon shop, a place bursting with chatter, the scent of sweat, and an ambience that can best be described as both lively and somewhat terrifying. You've got a chipped mirror hanging at a crooked angle, barely reflecting the chaotic scene in front of you. There's a line of eager patrons, each of them clutching a tattered coin in one hand and nervously stroking their beards or hair with the other, anxiously contemplating how ridiculous their new styles might turn out. You settle into the creaky wooden chair, squinting at the barber, who might as well be a jester dressed for court. He sports a stained apron, his wildly unkempt hair suggesting he's forgotten to pay attention to his own grooming. Definitely not the guy you'd trust to wield sharp instruments near your neck. Would you really want a man who looks like he wrestles wild boars on his weekends to touch your precious locks? You do your best to push these thoughts aside, reminding yourself that you're just here for a simple trim. But the moment he takes that first snip, the room fades as you hold your breath in anticipation, ready for transformation or calamity. As the barber begins his work, there's an eerie calm before the storm. You hear the gentle buzz of conversations morphing into a cacophony of shouts, laughter, and the occasional yelp of pain as a careless fellow patron receives a little more than just a light shave. Rumour has it that a rogue elbow strike might have turned that poor bloke into more of a medieval Picasso than he bargained for. But you're certain that won't be you. Oh, how wrong you are. The barber's hands twitch, a little too anxiously clutching those silver shears. Suddenly a sharp yank and a nervous chuckle escape his lips as he lifts a tuft of your hair that now seems permanently attached to his oversized fingers. In a panic, you wonder if today's service includes hair loss and shock therapy. The atmosphere thickens as the chair creaks uncomfortably beneath you. Each solemn thrust of the scissors gradually becomes less about trimming and more about the barber's unfiltered passion for uncertain art. In a shocking twist, he informs you he's hungover from the tavern's previous night's escapades. "Nothing a few nips can't fix," he roars, grinning like a demon with a penchant for blood. Your heart drops. Are you really about to be a hair casualty, a victim of an overzealous stylist full of bad beer and questionable judgment? You'd rather him not explore his creativity at your expense. Soldiers should not charge into battle against their enemies with a hairdo that screams pub brawler, as he deftly flips the blade back and forth, creating what can only be described as a tornado of hair all around your feet. The sensation of dread returns like a conditions check after a long siege. Has he already declared war on your hairstyle? He's laughing, while around you, men with ridiculous barbershop caps silently pray that their turn doesn't end with a trip to the village healer, or worse yet, the gallows of terrible reputation. Suddenly a rogue sheepdog darts through the door, sidestepping a couple of startled patrons. Without warning, the barber's hands jerk in surprise and snip! A slice of your hair falls. No, not just any hair, a hefty strand, leaving behind a shocking bald patch. You cry out as a wave of panic cascades over you, and the barber, oblivious to your horror, bends over in laughter, claiming you'll start a new trend. Patrons inch back, cautiously observing your impending doom, wearing a style reminiscent of a wounded rooster. "Fear not," he asserts, taking the whole mishap in stride. "Just a wee buzz to balance it out." But you know it's all downhill from here. The disaster befalls you, and the laughter erupts like a medieval jester's dance, every snappy comeback punctuated with fits of uncontrollable mirth. That sublime barber surgeon experience, you now emerge from the shop as a creature forged in shame, adorned with a haircut that screams both tragedy and absurdity, an offering to the world of botched transformations. While stout and grossly overlooked, the reality is simple. In the serious realm of hair, one must tread carefully. Who knew trusting your style to a barber could turn your hair into a calamity? You have now become an unsuspecting participant in a thrilling tale of medieval mishaps that will echo through the marketplace, a horror story with your name engraved in every tavern discussion for months to come. What about the women in this realm of chaos? Imagine the world where women barbers were just as skilled. They wielded blades with elegance, but faced hurdles to earn their stripes. This segment takes a step back to examine how they fought for recognition and a rightful place at the wooden vanity. Picture this: a medieval marketplace bustling with tradespeople yelling at the top of their lungs, while amid the chaotic din there she stands, a women barber ready to transform not only hair but the very fabric of societal expectations. But first, let's paint the picture of the hurdles women barbers encountered. In an era where patriarchy reigned supreme, where men were not just wielders of the scissors, but were also considered the supreme authority on all skills involving sharp objects. Imagining women elbowing their way into the barbering world is like envisioning your cat taking on a lion in an all-out battle. While many women did indeed possess the skill and the audacity to snip and style with the best of them, the popular belief was that barbering was strictly men's work. After all, how could a woman possibly cut a man's hair with finesse while still baking bread and minding the children at home? Talk about a culture of skepticism. Despite the biases, you had women fighting tooth and nail, often armed with nothing more than sheer determination and a pair of scissors painted in hopes and dreams. Some learned barbering from male relatives, while others cut their teeth, metaphorically speaking, hopefully, through apprenticeships that took years to complete. Just think about it. While their male counterparts were busy boasting about their surgeries, or exchanging dueling tales of mishaps in the salon, these women were hustling behind the scenes, with men happily swishing their hair through the air, oblivious to the hard-fought battles waiting at home. As women barbers began gaining their footing, some even established their own barber shops. Often they found themselves catering to society's more well-to-do ladies. Picture a charming little place where ladies could indulge in a trim, a braid, and perhaps even a soothing sugar scrub, gossiping with their friends in a space that felt more like a salon than a butcher shop. In a culture where appearances were everything, this was revolutionary. Women now took charge of their grooming needs while delighting in secrets and sharing cheeky rumours, a far more appealing alternative to the dubious caricatures being poised across town. But the winds of recognition shifted slowly for these skilled women. While their male counterparts were celebrated in the local taverns and guilds, the female barbers lived under the weight of societal pressures. Their work was often stigmatized, considered less serious. A common refrain was, "She's not a real barber, she's just there for hair and henpecking." Or, "Women aren't meant to wield blades, they belong kneading dough." Did they envision this as the end game? Not quite. Instead, women continued pushing night after night, wielding their blades with precision while drowning out the naysayers' doubts and critique. And for some women, the fight was about more than just their professional identity. It wove tightly with their sense of self-worth. By getting behind the chair, they were actively reshaping their own narratives, asserting autonomy during an era that constantly pressed against any form of independence. These women were the original trailblazers in the battle of the sexes, not only cutting hair, but scalping away outdated notions of womanhood. So, let's fast forward to around the late medieval period, when the craft of barbering began to experience a renaissance. Suddenly, as the demand for skilled hands continued to grow, women found themselves gradually plucked from the shadows and brought into the light. With the rise of cutting-edge salons appeared a new rush of clientele. The stars were aligning for these barberesses to claim their rightful places alongside their male counterparts, wielding scissors and straight razors in ways that would leave even the most accomplished barber blushing in shame. But would it be enough to carve out a community? Or would they be relegated to the fringes once again, their work overshadowed by the male-dominated law? As new visions emerged of haircutting as an art rather than a mere task, women too would rise in step, defending their place as honourable artisans. And who knew? Perhaps the next big hair trend would be sparked right from their hands, proving that briefly forgotten, yet fiercely skilled, barberesses were still suited for the task at hand. It's clear history's barberesses have long been engaged in a dialogue that resonates through the centuries, struggling against norms and expectations placed upon them. They weren't merely wielding scissors, but were fashioning identities, transforming lives, and eventually carving a niche that would lead to a seat at the wooden vanity. As we reflect on their journey, Let's remember, they faced dangerous blades, societal scoffs, and old wives' tales, armed solely with courage and exceptional hairstyling skills. That certainly gives a whole new meaning to cutting edge. Ever thought of barbering as a competitive sport? We'll delve into the rapidly competitive world of medieval barber surgeon tournaments, a vigorous world where skills were tested, injuries acquired, and grudges were born all in one day. Picture this: a bustling town square, newly polished wooden benches lining the way, a crowd buzzing with anticipation, and a stage set for the ultimate test of skill, nerve, and just a smattering of theatrics. Each eager participant stands ready, armed not just with shears, razors, and a fistful of leeches, but with a dramatic flair for showmanship that rivals even the finest knights in shining armour. The atmosphere is electric as you, the unsuspecting spectator, try to determine if you're about to witness a healing miracle or a glorified slapstick routine with more bloodshed than beauty. These tournaments often included a series of challenges pitting barber against barber in a contest of their most outrageous claims, like the man who boasted he could shave the hair off a bear using nothing but his bare hands, or more realistically, the one no one wanted to talk about who accidentally left someone a bit more bald than planned, permanently. You could hear the echoes of disbelief as barbers made daring claims about their prowess, while fending off jeers and laughs, facing off against friends turned rivals with quips sharper than their razors. Imagine the action starting with a dazzling display of cutting techniques. The first challenge pits barbers against a stationary dummy, a reputation on the line as they race against the clock to chop off as much hair as possible before the crowd convinces them to quit. The atmosphere is tentative. One slip could cost a barber their prize title, or worse, their dignity. Is it competitive modern art or the unintentional precursor to an incident worthy of the local medical journal? You'd be surprised how often that last sentence scrambles to include the phrase, "on the verge of comedic tragedy," after the first couple of hours. Next up, it's time for the crowd favourite, the leeching roulette. This isn't just about the cutting anymore, it's about strategy. Contestants have to choose the right cure for whichever contestant is being feigned ill. Misjudging the severity of an illness is a guarantee of teenage giggles from the audience, while the bravest barber risks waking from a multiple-toed slumber in the audience by losing, not just at the game, but in the very process of attempting to suckle water or molasses as if they were trying to summon the ushering wind of life back into an almost lifeless body. And as every medieval barber knows, there is no more serious rival than your former apprentice, freshly anointed as a certified barber surgeon. There's history here, a tangle of resentment and pride around the tournament's atmosphere. The stakes are high as each barber tries to outdo the others, while holding a grudge that would make for a thrilling soap opera complete with lamenting songs sung through fully blocked noses because, let's be real here, neither should have the winning title, yet here they were. But we're not just talking blood, sweat and painful encounters. It was a social event too. Crowds gathered, young couples met, and bets were placed on who would win, or more amusingly, who would publicly fail. Because sometimes laughter is the best painkiller after an unfortunate haircut or a botched bloodletting. You could almost smell the popcorn too, since medieval menus included savoury buns sold at the edges of the square during those events to accommodate hungry guts, all washed down with a sweet sour drink of fermented whatever. These barber tournaments, absurdly exhilarating, quite like a wrestling match among friends, required every participant to muster their best banter and skills. And as the day wore on and the competition got firmer, the atmosphere thickened with bravado. Miniature disasters unfolded like hairpieces flying and unsightly bumps appearing on freshly shorn necks. In the end, a victor would emerge, often the one who managed to charm the crowd as much as they could trim a beard. So, as the sun began to set and cheers turned to laughter, you couldn't help but wonder, in this world of grim and gory competition, were these barbers truly masters of their art, or merely participants in a rather comical performance art that celebrated the chaos of hair, flesh and camaraderie? One thing is for sure, the barber surgeon tournaments weren't just a show. They were a reminder that while they might have wielded sharp objects, the greatest tool of all was the ability to laugh in the face of danger, humorously scarred for life, as they all returned to their shops on Monday morning, coffee in hand, ready for another round. Allow us a moment to explore the surprisingly philosophical side of the barber's role in society. Were they the sages, confessional monks, or merely purveyors of questionable hairstyles? The meditations on how haircuts offer insights into the lives of their patrons are real. In fact, sitting in that wooden chair, surrounded by fading tapestries and the lingering stench of unrefined goat's milk soap, was akin to entering a mini confessional. Want to spill your deepest secrets about your latest mishap? Your barber was the unofficial therapist of medieval life, offering unsolicited advice while manoeuvring razors as if they were actual life coaches, albeit with a questionable track record. Imagine, if you will, how many lives were laid bare in that buzzing atmosphere of hair clippings and hot rags. Tell me about your day, they'd say, not to draw gossip, but to assess how many layers of hair needed to be removed along with the weight of worry clinging to your neck. Let's be honest. How could anyone keep a straight face when you had a barber who simultaneously served as a gentleman's guide to etiquette, while making you look like the latest fashion icon, all while discussing whether or not it was safe to eat beet soup this week? But ineffable painterly skills aside, how often did philosophy come into play in the unsavoury world of barbering? Think about the nuances of beauty standards. In the Middle Ages, a nobleman's court might deem an overly long beard fashionable, while another faction, perhaps peering through a dirty window onto the spray of dreadful gossip, would argue that a clean shave signified virtue. So, poor patron, what is it to you? Splitting the difference might result in something akin to lawnmower chaos. A bad haircut in those days was like stepping out in last century's fashion. It meant you'd fit right in with the mud-caked peasants. And here enters the barber with a keen understanding of his patrons' egos. Behind every snip and trim lay a different philosophy. For the knights who walked through the door, perhaps a close shave signified their readiness for battle, sword in one hand, elegance in the other. In their minds, shedding those annoying whiskers was akin to shedding fear. With each layer of hair that fell, they discarded yesterday's cowardice. Meanwhile, peasants ambled in with much less philosophical musings, just a simple desire not to look like so much tangled hay. A squawking chicken wouldn't even fit in with that mess. More often than not, barbers found themselves straddling a thin line between critique and affirmation. Picture this. You start chatting about last week's scuffle with a band of drunken lords, but then realise you're getting a little too comfortable. The barber gives you a significant look while preparing to trim the part that covers your ears. "Ah, yes," he seems to say without words. "My friend, these secrets have consequences." The ability to navigate both intimate chat and barbering finesse was perhaps their most significant feat, akin to balancing a spoon on your nose while reciting poetry in Old English. Just think for a moment how often subtext coloured your seconds in that chair. Your barber interpreted not just hair, but also the essence of masculinity, morality, and the fashion faux pas of the day. We can only imagine how many philosophical hairs were split while expertly calculating the razor's angle. Easier to understand why the barber was a respected figure despite their lack of medical training. Even the most skilled knight would reluctantly admit that an unkempt mane was less heroic than a finely executed coif. Yet, the role of the barber reached beyond mere trims, and perhaps this is where the philosophy found its root. While they took pride in each haircut, that sense of duty reflected a deeper commitment to the community. Every snip was a stitch in the social fabric of medieval life. Barbers offered a unique social space, places where ideas were exchanged, secrets were shared, and laughter echoed long after the chairs were vacant. And in this, their goal was simple: to beautify, to soothe, and to impart an unparalleled sense of dignity, despite the distorted outlook of beauty imposed by society. So, the next time you find yourself in a barber's chair, whether it's a modern salon or a dusty medieval shop, remember that you're partaking in a sweet communion of sorts. Here lies the beauty and philosophy of barbering, where every reflection in the mirror showcases the richer tapestry of life, shaved or unshaven. After all, beneath each tousled layer of hair, there are stories waiting to be told. So what happens to the legacy of this unique breed? Let's take a stroll down memory lane and explore that final haircut experience that leaves you in stitches, figuratively speaking. We'll reflect all about how these historical figures are colouring our understanding of both barbering and healthcare today. You see, the barbers of medieval Europe were far more than just simple haircutters. They were the unsung heroes of the operating room, getting their hands dirty with blood, sweat, and more than a few questionable potions while wielding tools that would make modern surgeons cringe. Think rusty blades and slightly questionable hygiene. Believe it or not, without their bloody contributions, the surgical landscape might have looked very different. Imagine this: the barber surgeon shaking their scruffy hair before tackling their next patient. The skills acquired on the streets were often passed down through apprenticeships, with the apprentice sometimes being the very subject of alleged surgical marvels. If you weren't faint of heart before entering that shop, you'd definitely feel a chill, or maybe sweat once inside. The whole experience might have made you question whether you accidentally wandered into a butcher's shop instead. Not all barbers were the bad guys here. Some really took their craft seriously. They would go on to lay the groundwork for future surgeries, leading to greater innovations as their craft became more respected over time. Fast forward a few centuries, and you'll find that the role of barber surgeons evolved into the more specialised professions we recognise today. Medical professionals dedicated to health and hygiene. It's like a job that went from "do I dare enter that shop" to "do I need a referral to a specialist?" This transition was monumental, as practitioners gradually became more knowledgeable about human anatomy and less inclined to remove your spleen because of a bad haircut. Thanks to the contributions of barber surgeons, practices we consider conventional now, like germ theory and anaesthesia, were born in part from the rather disastrous experiments of our semi-competent medieval predecessors. You might be wondering, how did the common barber transition from sketchy surgeon to respectable practitioner? Well, much like that awkward, scraggly teenager who finally grows into their big nose and braces, barbers got a glow-up. As medical practices became interconnected with societal needs, they started adopting the characteristics of proper professions. With the establishment of barbering guilds in the 16th century, the barber surgeon's reputation began blossoming. They organised themselves, developed codes of conduct, and even created standards for apprenticeships. It wasn't unlike how a band of misfit kids finally forms a kickball team and decides that they're going to win the championship. The 19th century breathed more life into the relationship between barbers and surgeons as the latter began to gain formal respect in society. By this time, even your regular barber had to pass health inspection and likely could recite a couple of important medical protocols. Most importantly, the demand for clean and ethical practices turned barbers from daily survivalists into professionals capable of grooming with a purpose. Clinical, suave, and distinctly hygienic. And here's the kicker. The legacy doesn't stop at haircuts or bloodletting. Like all great historical contributions, these barber surgeons left behind myths and mysteries that continue to influence our culture today. How many beard oils or trendy barbershops have you seen jumping on the vintage medical aesthetic? Come in for a haircut, leave with a taste of history? Now that's a marketing strategy that sounds like it was pulled from the archives of a barber surgeon's diary. Even the modern barber pole, that stately symbol of grooming sanctuaries, traces its lineage to the medieval barber's bloody practice. The red symbolises blood, the white represents the bandages used, and blue, well, for some reason, they decided to throw in blue because why not? After all, it was the medieval times, they were all about flexible logic. So, while you might sit in your local barbershop getting trimming tips or discussing the latest hair trends, remember that you are leaning back in a chair that holds centuries of trial, error, and more than a little attempted surgery. These barber surgeons, armed with what may as well have been kitchen utensils, paved the way for a future of health, safety, and fabulous hair. As you leave the barber's chair, hopefully with your head intact, maybe take a moment to appreciate the absurd history that shaped your very modern experience. After all, just think about where we'd be without our bloody but brilliant barber surgeons